Before we go any further, if you care about serious history, real survival knowledge, and lessons pulled from the hardest century humanity has faced, subscribe to this channel now and share it with someone who still believes comfort is permanent. This channel exists to preserve knowledge that once kept people alive when institutions collapsed and certainty vanished. What follows is not trivia. It is lived experience paid for in blood, hunger, and discipline. Most people think they understand World War II survival because they've seen uniforms, weapons, and grand strategies. What they rarely study are the quiet protocols civilians, prisoners, resistance members, and frontline soldiers followed daily to stay alive. These were not written down as rules. They were learned through loss, adapted quickly, and enforced by necessity. Modern society has forgotten them because modern society has not yet been tested in the same way. That is why this matters. Why survival in World War II depended more on behavior than bravery. The first forgotten protocol is that survival was behavioral, not heroic. People who lived did so by managing routine, not chasing glory. Civilians in bombed cities survived by creating predictable daily patterns, even under chaos. They rationed movement, avoided unnecessary exposure, and conserved decision-making energy. In practical terms today, this means reducing dependency on constant stimulation and learning to function under stress through routine. When pressure hits, habits carry you forward, not motivation. Why, staying unnoticed was often more valuable than being prepared. One of the most consistent survival behaviors during the war was deliberate invisibility. Resistance fighters, escaped prisoners of war, and displaced civilians understood that looking capable made you a target. They dressed down, avoided eye contact, and blended into damaged environments. In modern terms, this translates into understanding when not to advertise your resources. Broadcasting preparedness, wealth, or capability during instability invites risk rather than safety. Why food knowledge really mattered more than food storage. World War II survivors didn't just store food. They understood substitution. People learned how to stretch calories, recognize edible weeds, ferment scraps, and trade intelligently. In occupied Europe, knowing how to turn animal feed into edible porridge or extract nutrition from otherwise discarded parts kept families alive. These days this means, learning how to cook without recipes, adapt ingredients, and preserve food without electricity. Stored food, you see, runs out. Skill does not. Why social discipline saved lives more often than individual strength. Communities that survived understood unspoken rules of cooperation. Hoarding openly invited retaliation. Fair exchange built protection. And, silence protected networks. In prisoner-of-war camps, survival depended on group enforcement of rules about sharing secrecy and mutual aid. Modern application is simple but honestly uncomfortable. Strong communities require limits, expectations, and shared responsibility. Survival groups fail when politeness replaces discipline. Mental endurance often outweighed physical endurance. World War II survivors consistently described survival as, a psychological contest. Hunger was constant, fear was daily, and hope had to be manufactured, often from nothing. Those who endured learned to narrow their time horizons, focusing on surviving the next hour, then the next day. Applied today, this means really training yourself to operate without constant reassurance. Mental endurance is built by discomfort practiced voluntarily, not avoided entirely. It's about, becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. Why did mobility always beat fortification? Well, people who survived advancing fronts, collapsing regimes, and shifting occupations rarely stayed put for too long. They prepared to move quickly, often with little notice. Essential items were kept light, and information was always prioritized over possessions. Modern parallels are clear. Over-fortifying a single location without an exit strategy, well, it just creates a sense of false security. True preparedness, you see, includes mobility plans, route knowledge, and the ability to leave without hesitation. Why information filtering became a survival skill? Wartime populations learned quickly that not all information was equal. Rumors killed. Panic, it spread faster than bombs. Survivors cross-checked sources, waited for confirmation, and watched behavior instead of listening to proclamations. Today's information overload makes this protocol more relevant than ever. Survival these days favors those who can ignore noise, verify signals, and act decisively without emotional contagion. Now, let's talk about why moral flexibility was necessary, not corruption. It's a bit uncomfortable to admit, but, well, it's historically accurate. Survivors, you see, adapted their ethics to circumstances without abandoning their core values. Bartering on black markets, lying to authorities, and bending rules. These were often required to protect life. The lesson here isn't about lawlessness, but rather adaptability. Survival, at times, demands choosing the least harmful option, not always the cleanest one. And here's why skill redundancy prevented collapse when tools failed. People who relied on single tools or systems really suffered when those broke. WWII survivors, well, they learned multiple ways to achieve the same goal. Fire could be made several ways. Shelter could be improvised from ruins. Communication adapted when radios failed. Today, this means learning analog skills alongside modern ones. When technology fails, redundancy keeps you functional. Why energy conservation was treated as strategy. Every calorie mattered. Survivors moved only when necessary, rested deliberately, and avoided pointless labour. Exhaustion was fatal. In modern life, constant activity is, well, often mistaken for productivity. True resilience, you see, comes from knowing when to act and when to conserve strength. Survival is a marathon disguised as chaos. Why hope was treated as a resource that required management. Perhaps the most unspoken protocol of all was controlled hope. Survivors avoided false optimism, but, they refused despair. They set realistic expectations and found meaning in small victories. Modern application is learning to remain grounded without surrendering morale. Hope that ignores reality is, frankly, dangerous. Hope that acknowledges reality is powerful. These protocols are not relics, they are reminders. If you found value here, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who studies history seriously, and help keep these lessons alive. Knowledge survives only when it's passed on.